I could crank out a wiretap in a day.
Are you now tied into someone in the BMF organization?
Absolutely.
Right now?
But we just could never really get Meech for murder until...
What was the first big case that you worked on?
The famous case of the Black Mafia family.
I was locked up with Terry.
Okay. Southwest T.
Yeah, Southwest T. But I was locked up with him. We talked a couple times about writing his memoir. His brother, he'd already optioned his life rights to 50 Cent. But I don't think he'd written anything. Like they were optioning the right, but they don't have anything really written down at the time that I know of.
I don't think they still don't think they have anything. Everybody else has written about them.
Exactly. So anyway, I think 50 Cent ended up hiring somebody to write the whole series for him. Anyway, so we were trying to convince him, let Kay write your memoir. And he didn't want to. He wanted to write a book. I always called it a self-help book. But it was basically about how he was the brains behind BMF, and he was the kind of semi-shot caller with the business side of it and the whole thing. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. You can talk about that, but it also needs to encompass your life and the case and the whole thing. No, I don't want to do all that. It's like, bro, what are you doing? Like you ran a business that was an illegal business. Like that's not you can't write a business book.
Right.
So we had that conversation a couple times. He disagreed.
The 7 habits of highly effective people in prison.
Drug deals, yeah. Of drug dealing. So first, pick a product that people absolutely will get addicted to. So anyway, that never panned out. Kay did end up writing something. I forget what their agreement was, but I had talked to him a few times. That was when I first heard about BMF. And since then, I've listened to a couple of documentaries, and I've constantly hearing about it from people.
Sure.
But I don't really know what, like from a prosecutor's standpoint, like when were you introduced to? When's the first time you heard about it? Like how do you guys put together a case? Like do they come to you and say, hey, we need wiretaps? How are they convincing you that it's okay to put a wiretap on? Like,
sure. And it's a question I've answered multiple times. And it started with a DEA agent named Jack Harvey. Really, the story begins without Jack Harvey. The world does not know about BMF.
Okay.
Jack Harvey is just one of the most amazing, one of my favorite people in the world that I've ever met. Jack. So when I was in Forsyth County, I'd gotten to know Jack. He was a DEA agent, and one of our deputies was assigned to his task force. And I always talk about Jack Harvey, DEA, and I'd hear these stories about, Special Agent Jack Harvey. It's Irish. You build it up in your head. Even now, as I sit here, it's like I think Jack Harvey's 7 feet tall and broad-shouldered, red hair, beard, right? And so Mark, our deputy, brings Jack in with him. I'm going to introduce you to Jack. I'm all excited and. Because there he is over there. I'm like, behind the leprechaun? I'm like,
right.
Is this skinny guy, and very soft-spoken. And Jack, it was a case, I don't remember what it was, but he needed a favor on a case. We did it. It was done, and we became friends. So then we had disagreed on when this happened. I think it was a little bit before I went to Fulton, but he started talking about Black Mafia family, BMF. And Forsyth County at the time, I think, had a total of maybe 1 black family. We sure as hell were not going to try some jurisdictional bootstrap to bring the entire Black Mafia. I mean, think about how we would justify that to the county. Hey, you're Lily White County, but we're indicting all these Detroit gangbangers. Mm-hmm. But he would keep bringing me evidence. We would talk, and eventually when I moved to Fulton County, by the time I moved to Fulton County, everybody in Fulton, everybody in the U.S. Attorney's Office, nobody wanted to touch this Black Mafia family case. Because
why?
Well, because in my mind, it was Black Mafia Family / Black Mafia Entertainment. It was a music label.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, it was like the last thing I'm going to do is indict or start an investigation into 2 brothers from Detroit who made good. We had, there was rumor, there's innuendo, and a lot of prosecutors, especially these days, they'll just run for the headline. I was running away from that headline. There was nothing that ever that convinced me at that point that there was a Black Mafia family that was engaged in drug dealing.
Yeah, I was going to say the documentaries and stuff that I've watched have all been like, this guy got busted or something. but wouldn't say anything.
Exactly.
Like they're busting little guys, trying to get them to tie it in, and they just wouldn't. And then they were talking about how there were all of these busts, and they felt they knew that what was going on, but they couldn't make a connection. And it wasn't until I guess they got wires or something. But anyway,
Sure, right, and that's what happened. And Jack would lobby, and then APD, a good friend of mine, Bryant Burns, my other second favorite person. He was working it. He was close with Jack. He was working it from the APD's angle. They were talking to informants, and they were pulling together this case. And up until that point, there was an IRS agent, I think out in Detroit, who was working BMF, but nobody else was touching it because, again, it was people would get arrested with drugs. We would think that they were BMF, but we couldn't even prove there was a BMF at this point.
Other than the label.
And he put a billboard up, the BMF, the world is BMF, the world is ours.
Oh my God. From
Scarface.
Scarface.
Yeah. And it's like, I had to drive in every day, and it was almost, I think at one point I even accused Jack of actually putting the billboard up just to get me to say yes, and it was like, we're not doing anything with this, Jack. And then there was a murder, a young girl, Misty Carter, who was with her boyfriend, Ulysses Hackett. They were in her apartment, and a home invasion. They came in, they killed Ulysses, and then they shot her in cold blood. And that, to this day, that still eats at Jack. And so everything was about getting justice for Misty. But we thought we had an issue, but we couldn't prove it. And it finally got to the point where I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I'm trying my own cases. I was handling 5 courtrooms. I was a zone prosecutor, which meant I had to deal with the public, which was not my favorite. That's not my cup of tea. I was riding with the police officers at night in the zone. I was doing a lot of work, and eventually, and Paul Howard, the DA, he didn't want to touch this either. He was tired of hearing it. But what happened was they rolled up, BMF, some of the guys rolled up on a Kroger off Cascade one day. And there was an elderly lady that Paul Howard had known from the neighborhood. And they knocked her over. She said something like, all rude. And they threw signs and talked about Black Mafia family, BMF. And she called Paul, which Paul called Jack and called me and told us, I want y'all to do something about this BMF. Well, now we had a problem because Paul Howard believed we had a problem. But we still didn't have anything. We just sat around.
What about the IRS guy? Like these guys are buying vehicles. Like this is what I had heard. They're buying, they're buying vehicles. They're buying ridiculous stuff with cash. So I'm sure that's why the IRS got involved. Like you're saying it's coming from this label. Okay, well then we should be able to track this money, and you can't.
Right. But they're getting these were leases and false names. They had guys, doing it for them. Doc Marshall, Bill Marshall, was handling these cars. We call them bust outs. You'd lease them and then just not pay on them and just abandon them. And a lot of these guys who were working for him or were part of the Black Mafia family in Atlanta were hood rats. I mean, that's all they were. They were just they were rock slingers until they started, they came up, they met, and they would go in a group. And so, again, there was nothing I could put to say there was yes, there were people connected to each other who were engaged in for lack of a better word, fuckery and crimes. But to say that was part of the BME.
To say that's a part of a massive organization that's a huge leap.
Right, too. And being a prosecutor, in Atlanta, you can't be ignorant to the fact that, if you're going to go after two black entrepreneurs, you better make sure, or at least that was my thought process, you better make sure you have something and you're not just attacking them. Because I don't want to be, and I would tell Jack, I'm not going to be, standing up there and telling the judge, well, Judge, they're black.
Right.
They have Mafia in their name. We needed more evidence. And he would get more evidence, but there was never anything to tie it together until I mentioned this guy, Bill Marshall. He and his buddy, they had a place in Old Fourth Ward, and one night the guys come in a home invasion. So Bill waits for them down in his basement. There was a vault. They just vaulted it out, and he killed them, in self-defense. They were coming down to steal drugs and money. Killed them in self-defense. Called the police. All well and good, except that they left the 11 kilos in the vault when the cop got there. So they get arrested. And we're at a bond hearing and we're talking, and all of a sudden his attorney stands up and says, Judge, we object to any comments by the prosecutor of, related to BMF, the Black Mafia family. There's no evidence of Black Mafia family, and keeps talking about the Black Mafia family. Nobody had said anything about the Black Mafia family.
Right.
And in fact, I said, well, I guess now we have proof he's part of Black Mafia family. And it was immediate. Bill stood up. He wanted to cut a deal. So that was where we were finally able to say, hey, we have a Black Mafia family. And he debriefed with the feds. And in the meantime, we started trying to formulate a plan. But again, if you're going to wiretap somebody, you better know who you're going to wiretap, and you have to have a phone number. We didn't know anybody. And Bill was not, Marshall was not coming off that at the time. You fast forward, and I think that was in 2004, early 2004, so around August of 2004. Paul Howard wants to do a wiretap. It just happens to coincide with one of our investigators at the task force who wants to do a wiretap on the Pittsburgh area of Atlanta, about this young kid who's, he's selling drugs at the, getting 12 and 13-year-old girls to come home with him off the bus stop, and there's a real menace. And so I'm tasked at that point with doing a wiretap, trying to figure out how to wiretap, and then the promise is made, by one of the investigators, we'll be up on BMF in two generations, in two steps. Nobody ran that by me. And Paul's like, yeah, we'll do it. We can get wiretaps. We can do that. I want money seizures and I want BMF. And this guy, Raphael Allison, they called him Smurf because, he was so black, he was blue, and he was short. And he's just a scumbag, just really a dirtbag, and just selling rock. We couldn't understand him when we finally went up on our wiretap. Everything's all day long. It was like mush mouth, or like he was just an idiot. Yeah, there's just no other way to say it. His whole family were drug dealers. They're just ne'er-do-wells. And we're listening to a wiretap one day with some of the two of the officers who were listening to it. They were going back and listening, like, I think we have his source.
Can barely understand him.
Right, right, because all of a sudden it's like, blah, 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 and then he's talking to a guy very articulate, and we have spotters out, and he's driving a nice vehicle. We're like, he's got to be. I mean, why else would you be with Smurf?
Is that Southwest? That Terry?
No. We never.
It's not even Terry.
We don't even. I've never even seen Terry.
Oh, okay.
Terry was all out on his own out in the West.
That's what I had heard. Like that it was Big Meech who was the center of attention, and Terry didn't want anything to do with that. He was always off to the side.
Exactly. Terry was the brains behind it.
Right.
In fact, they got him on one wire, and I'm talking to somebody else saying that Meech was going to be their downfall, that he was out there too flashy.
Almost like John Gotti.
Or it's like anybody, like me even, it's just, wanton hubris, that you just think you can get away with it. And, but no, so Smurf was getting his drugs from a guy named DeCarlo Hoskins, and DeCarlo was getting his drugs from an associate of BMF, Omari McCree, the young gangbanger who eventually became the informant that brought the house of cards all crumbling down. And so, but we were going up on Smurf's wires. We kept going up on him, and it was painful, listening. It was just painful. And when we finally took down that part of the wire and arrested everybody, they were just like little rock cases. We had enough, but we couldn't just let it go away. But it was just painful. And I don't think that kid changed his clothes. I think we were up on him for 45 days. I'm pretty sure he never changed his clothes. It was just terrible. It was just the morning that we hit his house. He lived in some house that had been abandoned. It was just a disaster. And he still didn't understand it. It's like he could not, we were not getting anything from him. But DeCarlo was our next step up. And from him, we caught him selling a bunch of kilos to some out-of-state guys. And then we arrested him I believe it was Game 6 of the National League Championship Series in Atlanta. I got caught on camera doing that, and right downtown.
Okay.
So it was a waterfall.
So does he lead anywhere? I mean, you're saying you just kind of,
Yeah.
is that okay?
So DeCarlo, we catch him with kilos, and
does he cooperate?
He does. He does. Okay. And in fact, he tells us, hey, if you guys were listening to us on the phone during this time, you have my source. And going back before that, they're watching The Wire. I don't know if you remember The Wire.
Yeah.
Right? So these knuckleheads, theyey're watching The Wire.
Right? They're talking about it
on a Monday night, right?
Then they talk about it the next day.
Oh yeah, no, we're listening to them talking on the phone while they're watching The Wire.
Oh, okay,
right. And then the next day also, and it's like they're like, oh man, it's like they're almost there. It's like when you a complicated math problem, like you have it if you just fill out the next step, and we're waiting for them to to say, man, we should dump our phones. Instead, they're like, oh man, these guys would never know that we got our phones from Boost. We got, they're like, oh yeah, give me your new number. So they're giving out each other's numbers. Yeah. So we're like,
and then ditching that phone, and you just go and get a wiretap on the new number that they just gave you, right?
Exactly, right. And every time they get a new phone number, right, it's like, oh, here's your phone number. Okay, I'm killing this phone. Well, we had continuing orders and stuff, so we just kept going up on it. And when we arrested him, it's kind of funny. He goes, I knew I should have dumped the phones. I'm like, dude, you were watching The Wire,
right,
and commenting on how stupid we are down here.
So I have a question. How hard is it when someone does that to get another wire on the new phone? Is it like a week-long process, or is it basically you fill out a piece of paper and we got the next one?
It was the way we did it. It was the next day.
Okay.
What would happen is the district attorney, when you're doing a state wiretap, you have to comply with federal law, obviously, and with state law. But I would notify him that the next morning I would be bringing him a new application, notifying that at this point we had a judge assigned to us, notifying the judge we would be bringing a warrant, but they would simply be the same warrant, just changing out the phone number, and we'd have a brief page on the front.
And how bad does that look? Like, what I'm saying? Like just the fact that you're swapping out phones looks bad. Like, even if I have nothing on you, you keep swapping phones, you are doing something.
Exactly. And we would put it on the front. We would say new facts compared, so that the judge wouldn't have to read it all again. We would have, I'd sign an affidavit saying that nothing else has changed, and we'd put on there saying all these comments. And some of the judges, it changed, but some of the judges would look at it and be like, you're wasting my time. Other judges would be like, oh, this is great,
Right. And
it's like, we didn't want the commentary. The initial draft of the initial warrant took 45 days. It was hundreds of pages of information I had to go through.
It's like a master affidavit or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So by the time you do the application, and then you also do it as there's a warrant, the wiretap warrant itself. So it's all copied, but I think we were at 200, 300 pages of affidavit. And I would just sit there with the investigators. They would you got to cull through all this. And, it's just, oh, this is important, and again, God bless them. But sometimes, what's important to a cop is not what's important to the law.
Right.
So you got to keep out all the conjecture and opinion, be like, oh, she's a hoe. Well, how does that help me get a wiretap, Or, oh, she got pregnant at 13,
So-and-so's baby mama.
Right. It's like, you say like, well, who said that? I did. It's like, it was an Abbott and Costello. So, but by the time we're up after the second or third phone call or phone on Smurf, we had it running pretty well. I could crank out a wiretap warrant in a day.
And so now you're connected. Are you now tied into someone in the BMF organization? Because these are just little guys at the bottom.
Absolutely.
Right now.
But we're also, if you're familiar with it, a RICO conspiracy.
Yeah.
RICO, I don't have to, it's the ladder. So I've got Smurf, and I've got everybody he deals with, plus his mother and his brothers who are in prison. And we even caught them bringing drugs to a brother in prison. Stop that. But then I got DeCarlo Hoskins and the people that he sold to. And then from DeCarlo, we got the guy, Amari McCree and Jeffrey Lear, who were brothers. And they were Atlanta residents, Atlanta natives who somehow, and I don't know if we ever fleshed it out, somehow they got hooked up with BMF. They started hanging out with them. And for a while they were runners. They would they would take the drugs, they would sell it, or bring it to the people who paid for it. People like DeCarlo Hoskins, and but eventually they were told to stop.
Well, why?
Well, because Meech had gotten himself into considerable trouble, and there was a lot of heat on him at that point. He got arrested for a false ID. He felt that there was an informant, that somebody was working against him.
No.
Right.
It's not true.
Right.
Who would do that?
Well, it's funny. Nobody would at that point, but
so he didn't realize it was happening?
No, he didn't.
He was just assuming.
Right, because he didn't know about DeCarlo. He didn't know that Amari and Jeff were double dealing.
Okay.
So DeCarlo, people they were selling, that Amari was selling, they were pulling kilos off the top and selling them on the side. I mean, you got to think about this. You have so much supply that 2-3 kilos a week can go missing and nobody notices.
Where is all this coming from? I mean, like, I understand that they eventually lost like a source, and then they actually went out to California or something and got a source.
They went to Mexico.
Oh, Mexico. Okay.
They went to Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
ballsy, bro.
Yeah. They went to Mexico and they cut a deal with some sheriff down in Mexico. He brought it across the border. And the routes that they use, the routes that are used today by the cartels are the routes that BMF established, the St. Louis routes, the Louisiana routes. These are the routes that were established by BMF, the hubs. But yeah, they had it. In fact, years later, when I was hanging out in the party scene as a defense attorney, and thereafter, every once in a while, people would know that I prosecuted BMF, and they would tell me about how I ruined the supply in Atlanta. For a few months.
My bad.
Right? It's like yeah. I'm like, well, add that to the list of shit that I regret, I guess. But that's what they were doing, and the word went out to everybody in BMF that Meech wants everybody to meet. This was the first night we were up on Omari. It was a Friday. Omari's phone. They were told to stop what you're doing. Nobody sells any drugs. Let's go have a meeting. And said okay. And turns out that then they turned around and they kept fucking around with drugs. They kept talking about it. And that's what led to the end of the Black Mafia family. We caught his brother Jeff with kilos. We pulled him over on a traffic stop, he and his girlfriend. We took the drugs, and I introduced myself, gave him a business card, and told him, have a nice night. And then we went back to the task force, and we listened to that phone call and had a good laugh, the poor guy, he was stuttering. I think he's probably still stuttering. And that was it. Meech was furious. The word came out, they were worried that they were going to get killed. But that was it.
Why were they worried that?
Because they were told not to. They were told to stop all this. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you get pulled over with 10 kilos.
Oh, yeah. He's furious. Yeah. I told you to stop fucking dealing.
They couldn't figure out, how did you get caught with 10 kilos? This is the first time I've revealed myself,
Right.
We have agents there, and they could not figure out if we were dirty and took the drugs. And again, they still couldn't figure out, hey, there's an investigation. They just didn't understand. So then not only does Jeff have to explain why he's out driving around with drugs, well, what did you do with the drugs?
Right.
Because they did not believe that we had taken it. It was, we call it tickling the wire. When there's no chatter going on and you want to create some chatter.
Right.
And it worked well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think I listened to that phone call. Because, when you listen to these documentaries, they'll play certain calls. I almost feel like these guys were going back, and I feel like it was between him and, might have been Meech, where I think they were talking, between him and somebody, and they were saying, oh, no, I'm sorry. That's another call where they searched the car and they didn't find anything, but it still upset them. And they're having this conversation like, yeah, they got nothing.
Right.
Like, you're still talking about, even though they did have nothing, they searched the car, they found nothing. It's like, yeah, they're just upset because we're making big money. But if you listen to the spirit of the call, they're basically talking about how, like, we're so good at selling drugs that they can't catch us. And the feds, I think they were talking about the feds or the law enforcement is upset about it, and they're just trying to shake us down. And they're saying, but it's like, if you're a legitimate record label, this is not the conversation you're having.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't sound right.
Right. It's like you and I are not going to have a conversation. You get pulled over, for speeding, and we're not going to have this like, side of the mouth conversation about podcasts. It's like, yeah. I mean, obviously it was a criminal enterprise, and they just couldn't help it. And if you think about it, right. Criminals love to talk.
Right. Well, I was gonna say, what's funny too is I've written a bunch of true crime books while I was locked up, and of course that's why I like Master Affidavit. Like, I've seen all the FBI 302s, right. The DEA 6s. Like, I've read all these, and I remember reading the transcripts, and these guys are talking the transcripts where they're like calling one another up. My guy, which was named Doug Dodd, he's being called by this guy Lance Barabbas, and Lance is like, "Yo, bro, I need." What's he saying? He's like, I need 15 blueberries and I need, 30 green apples. And Dodd goes, what are we fucking farmers here? Don't fucking call me with this shit. And I've told you, don't call me. And I hang up the phone because he's like, Dodd would say to Lance, like, they're not stupid. Fucking green apples and blueberries, like, they know what those are. Like, what are you doing? What do they think, we're fucking farmers? Like, don't call me with that. He's like, yeah, they don't know what it is. Like, stop. They play that in front of a jury. The jury's going to be like, come on, man. You're not talking about apples and blueberries, bro. But they think they're so smart. It still looks bad. Juries aren't stupid.
No, it's like, when I, obviously we'll talk about it, when I, started doing drugs and it was getting deeper and deeper and much more, I couldn't get out of it. But I would call people, and say, hey, you mean, do you have any? Yeah, we have 3 cows. How many cows or sheep do you want? I'm like, motherfucker, am I farmer? Again, I'm not Farmer Brown. I was like, oh yeah, you want 4 Rolexes? Well, how the fuck am I going to afford 4 Rolexes? Yeah. Just give me the 8 ball, for Christ's sake.
If they're listening, we're done either way.
Right.
We're done.
It's just like, what I fucking want. I shouldn't, it's been, but it's like, do you have 3 nuns? Yeah. Or 4 7-year-olds? Oh, great. Well, give me a child charge while we're at it, you dumbass. It's just like, I just want some, but yeah, and that's what these guys were doing. They were talking about laundry and, give me, we got 4 bales of laundry. Well, like Amari's skinny as hell. They're both under 5'10". Why do you have 4 bales of laundry?
Yeah.
And or trees. Well, you got laundry and trees.
Any judge signing off on any warrant's going to know this. They're talking in code about drugs.
Sure.
I'll sign off on it.
Right. And it's funny, but it's like, it's always this stupid shit. It's like, it's never like, hey, can you just give me, you're better, like I said, you're better off just saying 4,
Yeah.
But it's trees and laundry. And remember, we're all sitting there and one of the guys goes, why would they have to? Is it at a nursery? We're like, no, motherfucker. Is it? It's just like, it's code. Tree, laundry is a kilo. Tree is an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Birds,
right? Birds. Yeah, the birds, the flights.
I'm sorry. My favorite story, is that when I first got locked up. I've told this story before, but you'll find it funny. When I first got locked up. Like, I just walked into the little cell that they're keeping me and like 15 other guys in, and I go to use the phone. I can't use the phone. And this black guy comes up to me. He's like, "Need to call you Peeps?" And I go, "What? Need to call Peeps?" I'm sorry. He's like, "Peeps, you Peeps." And I'm looking around like, I know he's speaking English, but I know like I'm unequipped to talk to you. So I look around, this this white guy comes up to me who's got horns tattooed on his head, facial tattoos. And I'm looking at this guy like, this guy's terrifying. He walks up, he goes, "Your people." And I went, "My people?" And he goes, "Your family." He wants to know, you're trying to call your people. He goes, "I got this." And the guy goes, and walks off. And I don't know what that means. I just know he grunted and walked off. And he's like, he wants to know if you're trying to call your people. Here's how the phone works. And he explains to me. He's like, see the little bar, you put this. This was a county jail.
Sure.
So I make a phone call, but I remember at that moment thinking to myself, bro, you are not equipped to function in this environment. You're going to have some problems. You need to get out of this. Like, you're not going to be able to even communicate. These guys are speaking English, kind of. Yeah. So 3 years later, I've been sentenced. I'm at the medium. I'm standing behind. Have you heard this story? I'm standing behind 2 black guys in line for the chow hall. There's 150 guys. You're waiting 20 minutes just to get your chow. And I'm standing there, and they're having this conversation. And the one guy says, "How you fall, man?" And he said, "Shit." He said, nigga got nigga fucked up over 2 birds in a stack. And he goes, know what I'm saying? And I sat there and I thought, oh my God, I do know what he's saying. Over $1,000 and two keys. Another black guy, snitched him out. And I thought, oh God, you've got to get out of here, bro. You have to get out of here. I mean, immediately, I could have had that whole conversation, and just with them, well, how many birds? Well, where was your source? Like, I knew all the slang within 3 years, and that was a horrible realization that I understood completely. So when you're talking about the guy mumbling and couldn't understand, or Andy's talking in code, or Andy's talking in that slang. It's impossible. It's virtually impossible.
It was terrible. And the Smurf, like I said, his wiretaps, this is how his wiretaps went. Mellow. Yeah. 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 All right. I mean, that was like the first 97 calls. They're like 13 seconds each. And I remember looking at all the agents going, what did I, it's like when the guy with the horns comes up to you, it's like, that moment when you realize perhaps I made the wrong decision. And that's how it was. And, it was funny. They were talking about bumps. And we're like, I got 17 drug agents. And I got DEA, I've got GBI, I've got narcotic, from multiple agencies, right? I look around and go, what the hell's a bump? Yeah. And this is, we're just, you don't realize it. We're not equipped. These, none of us were in the club life. I get it now. I know what a bump is. But when I look back at it, it's like, hell, if we had just known what a bump was 3 weeks earlier, we might have spent this thing along. They're talking about bumps and this. We just thought they were talking about, we were looking for a road that had a bunch of bumps in it, right. And trees and laundry. It was like,
I'm sorry, but I got us off.
Yeah.
What happened with the so Meech was furious at these guys who got busted. Sorry.
Yeah, and so they had to go between. They had a mediator. So a woman, they called her Yogi. She was like the house mom, and she took a liking to Jeff and Omari, and so we got her talking all over the phone, and she would pass messages from Meech onto them, and when this happened, when the kilos were taken, she was not aware of what they were doing. And it was very, very clear. Come to see me. Meech is pissed. Drop your phones. And the phones got dropped.
No new numbers?
No new numbers.
That's
no
upsetting.
New numbers. Right? So we did what we did. The only thing that we could do was went out and paid Jeff another visit to his house, trying to arrest Omari at the time because we had enough on him. And he eluded us. But again, they had no choice but to pick up their telephones. We kept them running so they couldn't stop at anyone. You can't drop one phone and lose all the numbers. So they started calling on it again. Mm-hmm. And this was towards the end. Meech was liquidating. He wanted to get out. And eventually, I think it was the night.
Had he already been arrested?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
He just then.
He just knew things were going wrong.
He knew shit was going south at that point. It was right before Thanksgiving. And we caught them talking to one of his attorneys. We'd gotten permission on our wiretap. There were some other, and a lawyer can give you legal advice, but a lawyer can't be a co-conspirator.
Yeah.
When you cross that line. So we were getting ready. We wrote our warrants. They had money coming in. They were doing a lot of counterfeiting. So they had.
I hadn't heard that. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. They had a lot of counterfeiting. So Meech was famous in Old Fourth Ward Day. Got up in a helicopter and threw all this cash out upon the masses. It was a Robin Hood moment. Yeah. It was counterfeit. So this is one of my most favorite. This is one of my most favorite moments.
You're all going to jail.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Here's one of my top 10 favorite moments with the fumbling, bumbling idiots of the Hoover Building. We have a guy coming in from Nigeria. Apparently, I think he was like a 7-foot tall Nigerian at the Ritz-Carlton Buckhead with 2 suitcases of counterfeit cash.
So he blends right in.
Yeah. Just, this guy, like nobody picked him out of a crowd. And he goes up to the top floor, right? We know where he's going because he's going to give them, I think it was $1 million or $2 million in counterfeit bills and take real cash as payment. The FBI wants to be part of this now. So we give them one job, right? It's one floor. It's an elevator, only an elevator. You can't get up there without the elevator, right? And then you stand down at that special elevator waiting for him to come off and arrest him. But yet they somehow managed to lose him. Not only did they lose him, they lost the counterfeit cash. So, well before Trump didn't like FBI.
Right.
I was.
You were doing it you didn't like them when it was
right.
Before it was cool.
Well, they live up to it. They're famous but incompetent. That's exactly what FBI stands for. They're just, they're a bunch of accountants, and they screwed it up so bad. And we are doing our warrant, and then they decide, well, they're going to go to their supervisors, and they tell us, oh, you can't issue your warrants, your search warrants tonight. We're like, or otherwise we're out of here. I'm like, oh, okay, well, throw us in that briar patch. Well, I mean, please, can you please stay and fuck up our case a little bit more? Now that we have $2 million in negative currency out there, right? And they did later on. Was my second favorite moment with the FBI. They're just, they screwed that up so badly, and then they withdrew because I yelled at them.
Right.
Because you can't yell at the FBI, you got to coddle them. Right. But
I didn't have a good experience either.
Yeah. They're like I said, at one point in my life, I looked up to them, and then I realized that they're just, the other agents, the other alphabets do well, but these guys.
It's funny you say that, because I've always said that with the FBI agents that were on my case, I said they were like glorified thugs. Like they were not. I had always thought they were the top tier law enforcement, but the truth is, when I actually sat down with them, they didn't know anything. They were extremely unprofessional. They were rude, and they were reliant on basically just threats and being thuggish. The Secret Service, which I didn't even know they did anything other than protect the president and look into counterfeit cash cases. They were extremely polite, professional the whole way, very detached, never got angry, never got, it was always Mr. Cox this, Mr. Cox that, would you like something? Very professional, it's like they're, very business-like.
Yeah.
That was not my experience with the FBI.
No, the FBI, and I've worked with them, I've worked across from them, I worked against them. It's always the same thing. It's the aura of being FBI, DEA, they're the gritty guys. They're the hardest workers. DEA, postal inspectors, those are the guys who actually get down in the dirt and dirty. ATF, it's just, we used to say drink, smoke, shoot. Right. It's just, they usually just bootstrap it along. But we had everybody in this case. The marshals are pretty cool to work with, but the FBI, if anybody should be charged with obstruction, it should have been them on this case, because you have one job, and then they took their marbles and they went home. They're, it's okay. Well, the three of you can go because we have 340 other agents sitting here.
Right.
By the time we close the job down, and then later on we seized a Hummer, Humvee limo, and again, we knew that there was money in this. They had all these traps and whatnot.
Little trap doors that they built in.
Yeah, turn the air conditioning on, tap yourself on the head. I knew it was in there. I knew it was there. And in fact, I even knew where it was. But, they assured me that, oh, no, we're going to bring the FBI in, and their forensic, auto forensic team. And these guys are the best, right? And then they reported back, no, they even sent me the affidavit. They certified that they'd searched this vehicle. There was nothing in it. Okay. You fast forward to the movie scene where they're auctioning the fucking thing off, and this older man he's cleaning the goddamn limo, and the roof opens up, and all this money falls out. Right? It's like, you really got to hand it to the FBI. It's like, they certified it, did you? I mean, how hard is it? You're talking about that much of gap. You can't figure it out, right? We got the money, and he got a finder's fee, but again, it's just their forensic auto unit. It might as well have been their forensic detail unit.
I have a hard time imagining that I would have called that if I had bought the limo, was cleaning it, and a couple $1 million fell out of the ceiling, that I would think, I need to turn this in. That'd be a moment for me. I'd have to give myself a stiff, like, honestly, this is probably drug money, and it's probably be better off spent by me than go in the coffers of the federal government. I feel like I would feel how much trouble would I get into? Come on, it's nobody's going to volunteer for this money.
Right. I mean, technically, you own it at that point. I mean, he did, I think in his mind,
he wanted to do the right thing.
Well, he's an older black man who's lives through the changes in society. I mean, think about it. He's sitting there, he's cleaning out, right, and thinking to himself, "These motherfuckers are trying to set me up. This is the FBI." Because again, he doesn't know that they're a bunch of idiots, like I know, right? He doesn't realize that it was negligence. He's thinking they're trying to set me. It's. And I guess in working in Poland, the older generation, they remember when cops were setting them up.
Right.
And then they had family members, the generation above them who were lynched. And so there's a lot of distrust. And the FBI is not, the FBI is not getting invited to reunions in Southwest Atlanta. The taste is still pretty bad in everybody's mouth.
So what's the finer fee on turning in? Was it it was $1 million, right?
I think it was $1 million. Yeah, I think it's 10-15%. You got a good chunk. I mean,
it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I take it all. Yeah.
I would have gone to the press simply to say, "See, the FBI screwed up again." It was frustrating. You think that, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, go. I was just going to say, Meech, at this point, Meech is liquidating.
Yeah, he's gone. And so we take him down. We do the warrant.
I'm not trying to rush you. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we go back to the same spot. That's all.
Sure. And I got to stay on track. It's like, oh, there's a dolphin. I mean, so it's the night before, 2 nights before Thanksgiving, we hit the search warrants. We go to his house. And there's a pot.
I'm sorry. Well, how do you get that? How do you know now we're going to take him down? Was it because you thought they're liquidating? We don't have a choice at this point. They figured it out. They're not selling drugs anymore. They're liquidating everything. We need to take them down now while we still have a case.
Yeah, that was the idea. The idea was because we lost the 7-foot Nigerian Counterfeit. So they knew we were on them.
Right.
And it was an accident. We were at McDonald's on Cheshire Bridge Road, and they just happened to be right there in front of us. We were not following. We were having lunch.
Right.
And Meech thought he was being followed. He talked to his lawyer. They wanted cash, liquidate. They wanted, pay off people in the department, talking about the sheriff's department at the time. That they had some people there. He wanted to know who was after them, what was going on. It was time, and everybody's phones, didn't care who it was, drop everything. So the phones went dead. There was nothing else going to happen. So we issued the warrants. We wrote the search warrants. And I think we started, I think, at 3:00 that afternoon. And Judge Phil Etheridge had said that he'd be available, and went out to his house at 10:00 that night. And he started reading. And Phil Etheridge was a great judge, but he just read every letter of each one, even if they copy, they were the same affidavit. He made sure,
right.
And he was very much law and order. He signed them. So the locations that we had, as we'd followed them, or we were able to determine. I went to Meech's house with the group out there, and we missed them. Again, it's up off Mount Perrin Road. And how in the middle of, right before Thanksgiving, this black man running down the street wearing flip-flops and boxer shorts.
Oh, when you say you missed him, you don't mean he drove away and you showed up 30 minutes later. You mean he bolted.
There was a blunt still burning, and there was a pot boiling. And he runs right out the back door of these, $1 million houses, and nobody sees him. A black man running down the street, right, with his underwear.
Everybody needs a good pair of jeans. What I like about the Perfect Jean is that the moment you put them on, they feel like sweatpants. They don't ever pinch or bind up. As a matter of fact, they're super stretchy. There's never any point where you feel like they're binding up on you, or they're tight, or they pinch you, or anything like that. They're comfortable in pretty much any position that you sit in. They're really great. They're comfortable, and they look great. And the best part is our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectjeans.nyc, or Google The Perfect Jeans and use promo code COX15 for 15% off. Normally, a good pair of jeans costs anywhere between $150 to $200, but The Perfect Jeans are reasonably priced at $79.99. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectgene.nyc and use promo code COX15 for 15% off. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectgene.nyc with promo code COX15. Please support our channel and tell them we sent you. F your khakis. Get the perfect jeans.
But again, I'm not, if we'd had the FBI, I could say, well, that's how we missed him because they were supposed to watch, but he escaped us. And we issued a warrant for his arrest, but I was long gone by the time they arrested him. I'd already left the DA's office at that point.
Oh, okay.
Because again, the feds don't issue arrest warrants. They indict.
Yeah.
And at this point, the amount of money, the amount of arrests, the amount of drugs, just the amount of evidence was building up. We knew, the FBI, U.S. Attorney, they were smelling blood in the water. The cherries were ripe to be picked. We knew they were going to take our case. It was never my intention to have the BMF case in the courts, in state court. So that's where we were headed with it. And but they can't issue a warrant, or they wouldn't issue. They didn't have time to get to the grand jury, and I'm not sure they were all convinced at the time, as yet,
that they had a solid case.
Right. So Jack Harvey, said, "Hey, can you get an arrest warrant?" Yeah, we put it to the grand jury. The grand jury had already been hearing about all this BMF stuff, so they were giddy. We indicted and got a bench warrant for all of them. We didn't get a lot of them arrested.
They turned themselves in later, like once
the feds. No, the warrants went to the feds. It was just it's commonplace. You issue the state warrant, the feds pick them up on it, and then the feds take them, for the first appearance, and then run them through on a complaint to the magistrate. We just could never really get Meech for murder. What we call the Club Chaos incident was Meech and one of his guys, Amin Height, who they called Bull, got into a shootout with Anthony Wolf Jones, and there was another fellow. They had a dispute, and people wanted at that point. This is before our investigation, and there's some at APD thought, well, this is it. We can get Demetrius Flannery, but it was a good shoot. At the end of the day, if you're gonna go after somebody, at least make sure you're a good shot. And Anthony Wolf Jones, his greatest claim to fame was dying. Dying horribly.
The humanity didn't.
Yeah,
they didn't lose a soldier. Right.
Right. He was P. Diddy's. He was Diddy's bodyguard at one point. So hell, he'd probably be a witness or a defendant now anyway.
Right.
But really, he couldn't even die right. It's just,
so what happened? There was a shooting in a club,
Meech and Amin Height go to leave the club, and these idiots are out there waiting for them and to ambush them. They're waiting to ambush them so that presumably you have your gun ready.
Right.
And they didn't. So they returned fire and killed them. And even Jack Harvey at the time said, "There's nothing. There's no there."
Yeah.
As much as we wanted them, or he wanted them at the time, there was just nothing. It was a good shoot. He should have gotten a medal for it.
Right. What ultimately happened in the case, though? Did these guys plead guilty? Right? They didn't go to trial.
No.
Okay.
So they from the top down, Meech and his brother Terry and their father, they all pled guilty, and they got time. I think Meech and Terry both got 30 years, if I'm not mistaken, federal. I was gone. I had nothing to do with it, and there was a federal. Terry was eventually released on compassionate release because of COVID.
Right.
And I believe Meech is out in a halfway house right now.
Right.
And then from there, I prosecuted Omari. Again, another misstep. It was so much going on that when we had arrested him, apparently some of the agents debriefed him, and he admitted laid it all out. He's the one who really hooked Meech into the conspiracy and what his role was, et cetera. But the minute he pled, the minute that he pled guilty, the FBI came and took him away and brought him up, to the U.S. Attorney as a cooperating witness.
Do you know in general how many people in total were pled guilty or were involved?
I don't, because it kept going on and on.
128 convictions total.
Right.
That's if they got everybody.
Right.
128 convictions.
And it was over 100. And that's just that includes the lower end from where we started going up, St. Louis, the unsung heroes in all this. It sounds funny, but I'm the reluctant face of this thing. I never wanted to be doing documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
It started with the Gangland documentary, and Jack called me and said, "Oh, I can't do it because we need Justice Department approval, and you owe me." So, and that's where I never wanted this because it kind of led to my downfall too. But South Carolina had the folks out in South Carolina. They did a great investigation. They had a big hand in it. Officers in Orlando. Orlando had a huge role in all this. St. Louis, Detroit, L.A. There's so many other agencies, but we're the ones who did the wiretap. And I think what kind of captured everybody's interest was that we spent so much money in doing the state wiretap, and we coordinated all these different agencies.
If the feds swoop in and pick up a case that you've been working on for 2 years or 18 months or whatever, do they reimburse the state for that for that cost?
No.
I mean, you would think they would reimburse the costs.
Well, it's really, so the task force, each member so we were running it through the HIDTA task force, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force.
So you're already getting federal funds,
right? So it's already run through there, but every time, let's say I seize $10 here, everybody who's part of an agency, their agency gets a pro rata share of that.
right?
And so that's how, that comes back in the forfeiture money and when the vehicles that get auctioned. Is what got me the District Attorney of the Year award from Paul Howard, because we started getting these checks coming in, and not just the stuff that we'd seized, but from the entire investigation that had, this is an investigation that had the same case number throughout the country. So you're seizing $100,000 in Detroit, you got $1 million in LA. Well, the Fulton DA's office gets a portion of that.
Right.
It was free, and it's free money, for purposes of there's no accounting for it. Once the feds give it to us, the DA can do anything with it.
So I have a question: if you seize 200 kilos, what happens to the kilos? They destroy them?
Yeah, they get sent to the lab, they're tested.
Do they hold them forever, or they chuck them?
When the case is over, it gets burned. They get burned. We'll incinerate them.
Because because I see these guys in prison who are fighting their cases, and they'll have, computer servers and all kinds of evidence that it's like, this is 15 years ago. Like you're telling me there's a box somewhere or boxes and boxes of evidence, and they just keep them. Like, they must have fucking warehouses full of this shit.
They do, and so long as that case is on appeal.
They just keep it.
They just keep it. I got to see the Wayne Williams, the Atlanta child murder, the files, that file. It's an entire room at the district attorney's office dedicated just to, a room of boxes and boxes and boxes, Yeah, you just have to keep them.
So why did you leave the district attorney's office?
So after BMF, which was closed right around December 7th of 2004, we started on another wiretap case. It was a cold case in California. And
it was a cold case?
A cold case, a cold murder
California?
in California. So we were going to have to...
But you're in Atlanta.
Correct. So we were going to have to get wired. So we were going to do a wiretap here and get orders out in California. We're going to capture the call in California, but route it through an Atlanta listening post. So it was dual jurisdiction warrants. And it was a cold case murder, like I said. And we were scheduled to go out there on March 11, 2005. And that, unfortunately, was the day that Brian Nichols got loose in the courthouse and killed killed Judge Barnes, Roland Barnes, and his court reporter, and Fulton County Sheriff's Deputy Sergeant Hoyt Teasley, and Dave Wilhelm, who was a federal agent. And it was, I wasn't there that day. I was on a plane. In fact, I was on a plane when it all happened, and phone call went like this, and it's like, and the prosecutor on the case, on Brian Nichols' case, was my girlfriend at the time. Eventually, became my wife and mother of my child, and now my ex-wife. But she was late because she was dropping me off at the airport. But the phone call I got as we were leaving was, "Where's Gail? Judge Barnes is dead. Julie's dead." And then the phone was dead for the next 4.5 hours. Shortly after that, the way our office handled it, the way it was handled in general, left a bad taste in people's mouths. So there was a mass exodus from the Fulton DA's office. ADAs were leaving.
Why? Why specifically? Because I mean, let's face it. That was, I mean, although it was a horrendous event, it was extremely uncommon.
Sure.
Like you could think to myself, that's happening every few months. It's that him getting away and the circumstances and
it was a confluence of idiocy.
Yeah.
And just an absolute lack of professionalism and procedure. I can't speak for why everybody left. Some already had jobs in the works. Usually, at the time at Fulton DA's office, when people left in droves, you leave in groups of 3. This was the mass exodus. It was a cathartic exodus. People had enough.
Yeah.
Not everybody was as gung-ho crazy as I was, And again, wasn't gung-ho crazy about trying, being in the unit. I liked just being out there, running free with the cops and running the investigations. I stuck around. I probably shouldn't have, but it had an effect on me. And I started drinking. I went from 2 drinks a week to a bottle a day, which eventually led, and hanging out all night and showing up to work, fucked up, which eventually led to drugs. And so I left in June of 2006 and went out into private practice. The practice flourished. We did well. I did well. But as I continued to be successful, I guess the appetite, I continued to use it more. It was the constant being out. I mean, that was my thing. I was out, out and about, getting to know people. And the more you win, the more money you make, the more cases you get, the more, again, I think I said it was just hubris. Until eventually, I found myself, without my wife, without my child, without my son, and I just kept going. At that point, it was, for me, it was going to end. I just didn't know how it was going to end. I figured, eventually, I just wouldn't wake up one day. The amount of drugs and alcohol I was putting into my body.
Well, can we jump back real quick to one of the guys I was locked up in Coleman. We talked about this. I was locked up in Coleman, and I want to say it was in B3, B4. Anyway, at the Coleman Low, and I was locked up with a guy named everybody called him Junior. He always used to say, he told me one time his my name's actually Junior. But he's like, but nobody can say it. So it's Junior, and then we were, before you got here or before we started, you happened to mention that you were his attorney. Right. Can you talk about his case? Because it's funny, because I know about his case by I read like one article, and then I know his case by talking to him. You have a lot more, and I understand you can't talk about a lot of it. You can talk about what's out there, but I have a skewed version of his. But even the skewed version that I have of his case was still brutal, Sure. And talking to him, but he was big on. This was a guy that just, he just was. We're locked up together, and he just was not. He just would not take responsibility for anything. He just wouldn't do it. And it was like, like they didn't put you in here. He got a sweetheart deal, like which
hell
we
of a
talked
deal.
about. And and wouldn't take response. Still was even locked up in prison, was bitching and moaning that he had to do any time at all.
Right. He's recalcitrant. Absolutely. I can't say that because that's just an observation. Yeah, Greg, I knew Greg. He was one of the first narcotics cops I think I met when I started in Fulton County. I liked him. Affable, personable, great
Nice guy. Yeah.
APD narcotics at the time was divvied up into teams. He was a team leader. And I was friendly. I tried to maintain good relationships with all of the narcotics officers. You fast forward towards the end of my career in Fulton County, that group we were gun shy. Our unit was shy about taking any cases from that group. There's things weren't sitting right. The anomalies or every case was too similar. We didn't have a full blown policy, but it was do what you thought best type of attitude at that point. So then I left the district attorney's office. And in Thanksgiving, I believe of 2000 Thanksgiving 2000.
And it was a little narcotics group. They were a narcotics
right,
team,
they were team
right?
one.
Okay, team one.
And it would change. Officers would get moved in, get moved out. Ideally, and it probably would have been best for me also, is that you should transfer your your narcotics people out every couple of years so that you don't run into these problems that we have. But around Thanksgiving of 2006, and again, everything in my life seems to hinge around Thanksgiving issues. The call went out of shots fired. They had on Neal Street, the home of Katherine Johnson. The APD narcotics had breached the door. Upon breaching the door to execute a search warrant now, that she shot, his elderly grandmother shot at them, and they returned fire, killing her. And in the initial reports, and I believe Greg was hit by one of the bullets. The initial reports coming out was, must have been a grandson or somebody, because they'd gotten a confidential informant to buy drugs from this house. And
they had like a no-knock warrant or something.
They had a no-knock warrant. They actually, there was two doors on that house. One was from which you would enter and go. The other one was pretty much a welded burglar bar door that they closed in that wall. So they basically came through her wall. She didn't know what was going on. She thought she was being invaded. Mm-hmm. And but the initial reports that they doubled down on was that we had an informant who bought drugs from this house. And obviously it wasn't her, but it could have been a grandson. People couldn't piece it together. And so after a couple of days, it became very clear.
Well, so they break in the door.
Right, they break in the door.
She thinks it's a home invasion of some kind. She fires at them while trying to call 911.
Right.
They return fire, and they kill her.
They kill her. And she dies on the scene. And again, from as far as what the world knows, they know the official statement that we had an informant. What's going on behind the scenes is that, Greg and his team are told, you better go and get your informant in line here. We need to figure out what's going on. They're trying to track the informant down. In the meantime, the informant runs to the press saying, he gets a lawyer and says, I'm being threatened by these guys to say that I made a buy. I didn't make a buy there.
Right.
So the feds start getting involved, this
is within days.
This is in days. This is just one of those things where it avalanched so quickly.
Can I say what
Sure.
Greg had told me?
Yeah,
whether it's just true or not. So Greg had told me that what they were doing was they would, in this case, actually, I think it was in this case too, and you could tell me if I'm wrong. But in this case, I believe he said they'd pulled somebody over, asked that guy, "Where'd you get the drugs? Just give us an address. We'll go. Just give us an address. We'll let you go." So he says, and 1915, 24th Avenue, and they go, "Oh yeah, I know where that is." So they all they understand where it is. They say, "Okay," they let him go. They then go to. He said, "You have and I may not have this perfect, but it was certified CIs. He's like a guy that's his word is good. We've gotten many search warrants based on his word." And he said, so we get him or they use his name, they write up like an affidavit, they go to a judge and say, our certified CI has said he purchased from this house. And he's done 15 different whatever, and the judge is like, okay, and it's good. Yeah, it's good. He signs off on it. Then they go and boom, they break into that. They do the no knock warrant where they just start basically just go in the house without saying anything. They just go in, and so they go through the door or they go through the wall or whatever, and that's when it's not the whole. This whole thing is. The initial guy they pulled over gave him an address, but it was a bullshit address. Right. He'd never bought from that woman. He'd never bought from anybody in that house. It's a random house. So when Greg and his team go into the house, it's just some old retired school teacher who's never done a fucking thing wrong other than be a school teacher and retire and live in her life. And these guys break into her house. She pulls out her little gun. She's on the phone. She fires. They return fire. They kill her.
They murder her.
Yeah.
They murder her. And it's exactly right. A regular warrant based upon a CI buy would say something to the effect of, the affiant, knows the confidential informant. The informant has worked in the past. Knows the informant not to be unreliable, to be trustworthy. And that also, I gave them 15 marked dollar bills. I watched him go to the house. He then came out of the house. I immediately searched him without losing line of sight. I searched him again, and he did not have the dollar bills, but he had $15 worth of crack on him. And I can, from that, I can conclude this is what happened.
Yeah, there's no way he could have swapped that. Right, he went in the house, got the money. Yeah, exactly. He bought something.
So what happened in this case, and what it turns out what was happening in all these cases, you and I are on the team together, and I say, hey, Matthew. Go. You need a warrant, don't you, for your quota? Oh yeah. You haven't done enough warrants this month. Well, that house over there, I've got a CI who got a buy, and it's CI 422. And while you're at it, why don't you sign out a voucher so I can pay him, right?
Right.
And so you say in your affidavit, you say I personally observed CI 422 go to the house, right? But you didn't. You weren't there because I told you that this is what happened, but you're making it sound like you did the observation. That make sense?
Yeah.
So what they were doing was passing off. It began with passing off their observations so other 8 officers could have their numbers, their warrants. It ended with just making a bullshit just to execute warrants. And that was one of the things we were seeing, that all these warrants were coming back, negative, like with a little bit of weed. And, like you're saying you have in the house, and guns, but you're coming up with a pill. It didn't make any sense. But again, and this is where I did everybody, I think, a disservice, because I believed Greg. And I not just Greg, I believed these officers when they told me, oh, this is what happened initially. So the feds sent out notices to this team that they wanted to know, come up for your interview, you could have a lawyer. I took, the first officer I took, I'd known him for years. He had been on the DUI task force.
This is after the shoot?
After the shooting,
okay.
The feds started doing interviews. It was voluntary interviews. I didn't have Greg. I met with Greg, but I took the other, Kerry Bond. He was a great guy. He got caught up in bullshit. He was brand new to the drug squad. Didn't really know any better. He was a phenomenal DUI cop. And we went up, we spoke to the feds. And I believe Sally Yates was there and an FBI agent. And we talked and it all went very well. We were in and out in 30 minutes. And as we're leaving, Kerry makes a comment. He goes, do you want to know about all the warrants all the fake warrants or something like that? And it was like, what? It was like, if you had somebody with a trombone be like, wah, wah, wah. And thus began the longest day of my life. At that point, we were there for hours. And by the time we went from walking out of this thing free and clear to, okay, we need to talk, proper letters and federal sentencing guidelines. Right. That was just on Kerry. And then Greg had already informed them he intended to hire me. I didn't, and again, that morning, there wasn't a problem with conflict.
Right.
By the time I got out, and everybody agreed that Greg wanted to hire me. I went and spoke with him, and he told me some other things. Eventually, as everybody knows, he cooperated.
Right.
Not even I could, and he's been open about it, but not even I knew about the scope and the breadth of just how ratchet the whole system had been.
It'd been going on for 10 years.
Years. Not only that, they had a racket going, a security racket. So the businesses who pay for that for the extra security from his team. Now these are cops who are supposed to be out there, like 911 calls. They send police, right? But instead, Greg was they were running their own security. So if you needed 911, you called Greg, and he sent patrols, and so he paid these guys the patrols extra. But if you called Greg and you'd been late on your payment, well, you didn't get your patrol that night.
Right.
It's just, and I don't know how you get to that point where you think that this is okay. It was just catastrophic, and the amount of officers whose careers were ended because of it. It was probably, as I said earlier, that moment where when you think to yourself, I probably should not have done this.
Right.
It was not a good case. And as you said, I think you mentioned when we were talking, that he griped about my services. Well, he could have gotten the death penalty for what he did.
Right. Well, he goes into the feds, and he cooperates against the other officers.
All the other officers.
All the other officers on the team. He's the first one to talk, so he gets the best deal.
Right. The two that were on the team that were part of the lie, because they were made up of threes, and then starts telling on all the other about all the other bad cops.
Right.
But yeah, initially I think the offer was 40 years. He was eligible for the capital punishment. 40 years, and we got him to 6.
Right.
But as you said, it's nice to know. It's nice to know that he's still griping. He's still griping about it.
Yeah. The whole time he was in the unit, he was the head orderly, and we'd had many discussions. And what's funny is at one point, one of the guys got his. They had somebody from the outside mail in some articles on him. And they were passing around the articles. Like, these are all guys that, they're all stand-up guys, and they want to make sure that everybody's square and good. And they wanted everybody to know that, this guy's a fucking, he's a fucking snitch, and he this. But which is true. But one, he's a head orderly, and two, you're at a low. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not going to do anything. Like, you just want what? Everybody to know? Like, Greg would tell you. He didn't give a shit. Right, like, he really didn't talk to him anyway.
I mean, who in a federal CI did not cooperate or give a little bit of information?
Right. So he's in there. So he and I had many, many conversations, and he had told me some horrific stories, not even about this, just about just horrible story. Like, they were chasing a guy one time, and the guy on foot. Oh yes! Oh my gosh! It's. I always wondered if that was true.
Yeah.
The guy, they were running across an overpass.
Ran across the overpass and jumped.
And the guy jumps off the overpass, and Greg said they almost jumped off, but he said they stopped at the last minute. Realized when the guy initially was running, the overpass was starting to go down, and he didn't realize that an extra 10 or 20 feet. By the time he jumps off, it's now a 30-foot drop, and as he's falling, there's a fence down there. The pole of the fence, piped fence, hits him in the head and yanks his head right off his body. The body is laying on the ground, and his head's on the spiked fence. Right? I mean, yes, he just knew it. Greg had told me the story in prison, and I remember thinking that cannot be true.
There's a scene in Predator, in the movie Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he takes the skull and the whole spine out of the body and just drops the body like a sack.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, horrible. But he had tons of these stories. But at one point,
the guy had dreads, but he had this look on his face like, "Oh shit, perhaps I should."
Horrible.
He was not on the Olympic synchronized diving team. He did not time that very well.
I remember Greg one time, he had gotten something in the mail, or his wife had come to see him or something, and they had tons of money, and he was bitching about how somehow or another, his fear was that he was going to get out of federal prison and have to go to the state. So his fear was he was trying to get put in for like a year halfway house.
Right.
But the state wouldn't sign off on they wouldn't remove, like they'll have like a hold on you.
Sure.
They wouldn't remove the hold because he's still in state custody also.
They wanted to make sure that he did his time.
As much time as possible. So he can't go. He's basically going to walk out the door, no halfway house. He's trying to get on halfway house so he can get on an ankle monitor, but the state won't sign off on it. And he's bitching about it. And I was like, well, I mean, it's an extra year. It's not that big of a deal. He's an extra year. He's like, this is bullshit. And he's complaining. And I was like, I'm doing 6 years. I shouldn't have done any time at all. He's like, oh, and he said I had an agreement or something. He started talking about having an agreement for a few years or 5 years or 4 years. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. And I remember going, I mean, Greg, I said, let's put it in perspective here, bro. I said, you killed someone. And he's like, and he goes, she shot me. And I go, you broke in our house. He's, we're the police. I go, she's a grandmother who's never broken the law.
Right.
And I go, bro, come on, man. Use your, I'm not trying to start an argument here, but come on, bro. 6 years. And he's like, you don't understand. And I'm thinking, yeah, I do understand. I know tons of people that are entitled and don't think that they've ever done anything wrong in their life, despite the fact that you just murdered a fucking innocent
Exactly.
woman.
And that's how it was every day. In fact, I had co-counsel. The Superior Court Judge, Gino Brogdon, had just left the bench voluntarily. He wanted to go back into private practice, and he was on the case with me. And we, again, without revealing any confidences, but again, he showed, Greg never understood that if a police officer breaks the law, he's not a police officer.
Right.
He just happens to be a criminal with a badge on.
Yeah. His first thing was, we're the police.
Right.
First thing he said.
You could be, the hosts of heaven. If you're breaking into the house, you're fair game.
Yeah.
And the argument was always, well, how did she know that we didn't have the proper authority? Like, well, because she's 78 fucking years old, watching Wheel of Goddamn Fortune, and you're breaking into a welded door.
Right.
Like, I mean,
and
what do you
she's
think?
never broken the law.
This isn't a door that it swings open that people come in and out of. This is a burglar bar door that has been welded to the frame, right? So they're prying this thing open, right? What do you think is happening? It was just, it was one of those nightmares that recurred for quite a while with me on that. And I still stand by it. And he would tell anybody, well, Rand was fucked up at the time. Well, of course I was fucked up at the time. It was a shitty case. It was a horrible case. The facts of the case were miserable. They were terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think that deep down, I think he knew something was wrong. Like I told you, he was bone thin.
Yeah.
I mean, bone, like people were like, bro, you have to gain some weight. And he used to say, well, it's the food here. It's not the food here. He was puking in the bathroom every time he'd eat. His teeth were being eaten out of by the acids. They're being eaten out of his fucking mouth. So we used to, and the guys would say, like, bro, somebody needs to say something. And they would say, yeah, that's his conscience eating at him,
Maybe.
And maybe it was. Like, I mean, he even though he bitched and moaned about it, but I mean, deep down, I think you've got to know. Or you think no?
I don't. I just don't.
I think he's just an asshole.
Yep. I met his parents. His parents were wonderful people. His wife, Tammy.
His wife was beautiful.
Yeah. But, it was very hard. And I had a hard time back then. Now I can tell anybody, you never wanted to, insult my clients. Back then I told people what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to hear. And again, the constant conversation was, well, he's a hero. He's a hero. Well, he puts his life on the line, but it's like, but you're not a hero. Again, you can't sink the fucking ship and then expect to get accolades for saving the survivors.
Right.
You choose one or the other. And it got to the point between the two of us where I just couldn't take it anymore. There was, in his mind, there was nothing that I could do to make him happy. The initial deal with the prosecutors, of course, you're sitting down on the initial was like, of course, you could get no prison time here. Of course. But everybody knows it's not going to happen, right?
Right.
And, when you get, the state, Paul Howard wanted to, brought him up on murder. He was going to run his own investigation. He and I were going at it in the press. The feds were trying to get everybody back to the table. And we got calls from Maine Justice telling us to cut the shit out and get back to and get a deal done. Everybody wanted this deal done. And it was a phenomenal deal. Again, you murdered a woman under the color of law. Mm-hmm. You threatened an informant. You admitted to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of evidence planting, of putting hundreds of individuals and citizens in jail under convictions, right? And then you only get 6 years.
Yeah, it's a bargain. Yeah. It's a bargain.
I was a hell of a lawyer on that case.
Yeah. I don't mind.
Got a hell of a deal.
I don't say so myself.
I'm not going to break my. I'm trying to break my arm, pat my back, but that was a hell of a deal.
Yeah, that was.
And he got sent to Coleman.
Yeah. Coleman was great. Coleman was great back then too. It was great.
He should have been.
It's the garden spot of the BOP.
Right. I mean, he could have gone to Leavenworth or the Atlanta Fed.
Oh, he could have had a problem.
Yeah.
Anywhere else he had gone, he probably. I mean, if it was a low, he'd probably been okay. But he could have had a hard time.
He's lucky he didn't go to a max.
Yeah, he had a sweet spot. I mean, and he had a sweet job, and all the officers liked him, because they're all semi-corrupt. So they all thought he was okay.
There's camaraderie. Again, I think if you look at it not in a vacuum or in a vacuum, he made a mistake. Got spent. I don't know at what point that those lines got blurred. And again, I liked Greg. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
You can like somebody and not like what they did.
I was going to say, he was never a prick to me. He was always very polite. He was always willing to help. He was always, very professional. He wasn't a dickhead. But when you talked about the specific things, he just was delusional.
But for thinking that he deserved a medal for all of that, he's a great guy.
Right.
So,
Oh, I was going to say, so what happened? So, I mean, after that case, I mean, are there any, basically, what happened after that case, and why aren't you a lawyer?
Well, after that, since you put it that way,
I mean, why leave a career where you dealt with such great individuals, right, and the cream of the crop that you were dealing with,
Well, it wasn't necessarily voluntary. So that was right after that. We got pregnant. My wife got pregnant, and she was tired of my bullshit, and kicked me out. And again, don't blame her for it. She tried for years. She tried to help me. I kept practicing law, and on my own, and without any accountability. And so I was drinking, I was going to clubs, I was drinking. I represented, I represented some of the nicest people in society. I represented cartel members and Russian mob guys, and, who the Russians can drink, they at all hours of the day, and they're not coming to the office. They're, right, you're meeting them where, and the nights just turn into days that turn into nights. That's all there is to it. And I was still winning for the most part. I made some mistakes, but I was representing a cartel. I had money. I didn't really need to go out there hustling the DUI cases. And, I got so caught up in it, I didn't even know which way was up. And,
what happened with your partner? You were partners initially with someone, I thought.
Right. Well, it was my wife and I. Oh, okay. And then we had another one up in South Dakota. Because we did sports management stuff also, and that didn't work out. So I was on my own. And again, in my mind, I was the greatest lawyer anyway. So I was handling it. I was just kept working. I was working, drinking, drugging, working, drinking, drug. Every night of the week I was at a different club. I mean, I knew everybody. Every bounce. I knew everybody. And it's just that lifestyle. And at some point, I just figured, I knew I was never going to be able to quit. It just, my mind, I just figured, might as well just ride this wave to the end.
I mean, did you ever go into a rehab?
I did. I went into a treatment to detox, and I lasted, I think, about 3 months on the outside till you know, it just, again, I represented drug dealers. And,
Right.
You know, I was around it all the time. And it just.
Did you ever try and go to AA meetings? Or?
Yeah, I did. Didn't really, I'm sorry. It didn't, yeah, I tried AA. Here's what worked for me and what finally got me clean. Well, I got arrested a couple times, but not even that got me clean.
Are these for DUIs?
No, I got arrested for drug possession.
Oh, okay.
In 2012, I was arrested for drug possession, and then ended up having to plead first offender on that in Fulton County. And then,
And you're an attorney.
well, I was. Yeah.
Okay. Was that the nail in the coffin?
No. I went and got special nails for my coffin after that. Shortly thereafter, I was in Cobb County and fucked up beyond all recognition, pretty much. And Judge Grubbs in the Cobb Superior Court gave me the option. She said, "You're messed up. I can tell you're messed up. Go home." So what did I say? "No, Judge, I'll take a test."
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I spent 5 days in the hole in custody for contempt. And at that point, the bar was done with me. It was an emergency suspension, and I didn't contest disbarment at that point. What got what got me clean was my son. In the midst of all this, and I was still showing up and being there, but nothing. My son is the most amazing young man. He's 16 now. And it was tough. I'd love to say like, oh, holding him, I knew I would immediately stop drinking and drink. I get my shit together. It didn't work that fast. But right after I was arrested, I was sitting in my law office, and my lawyer, he owned the building, was sitting there trying to talk the shotgun out of my hand because I was fucked up. I was all in the press, and I didn't see a way out of it, and he gave me the best advice. I said to him, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I can't. What am I going to tell my son? I'm going to lose my law license." And he said, "What am I going to tell your son?" Mm-hmm. He said, "At least you'll be here, and you tell him, you say, hey, you get knocked down, you get back up, and he goes, and if nothing else, you're the example, that tomorrow," he said, "tomorrow," Daniel Kane was my lawyer. Danny looked at me, he goes, "Tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "It's going to be shit." He goes, "Next week's going to be even shittier." He goes, "You're going to have a couple of really bad months." He said, "But there's going to be a tomorrow you wake up and it's going to be so much better, and it's going to get better, and you just got to keep fighting till you find it." And so I concentrated on being a dad, a good daddy, showing up and being there and hanging out with my son. And like I said, he's the best of both of us, his mother and I, just I couldn't, whether you're a father who has a son or you're just a son to a father, every man knows, the fathers and sons, it's that issue, and he's brilliant. He saved my life. It's just wanting to be in his life, and it was the best advice I ever got, was just being there, and hopefully he takes it with him and say, when things get hard. Well, my dumbass dad did it. He kept getting back up. Yeah. But that's what got me through it.
Life's not it's not a fantasy. Things go wrong. Things that's not perfect. Things go wrong. People fuck up. So,
but I'll say, Raiden, is my son. Like I said, he's the best of both of us. But he got me through it.
So. I mean, after you lose your license, what were you placed on probation?
Oh yeah. So so in Fulton County, they put me on this amazing sentence of this is just phenomenal. So I get caught with possession of a couple firearms. They suspend the firearm charges, 2 years on probation, and to be suspended immediately upon completion of a drug rehabilitation program under first offender, and 240 hours of community service speaking to local bar associations to other lawyers about drug use and alcohol. Yeah.
No, what? No, you don't want to do that?
Fuck no. No. But so I went to Fulton County to do my probation and to do community service there. And I spent a lovely day down there picking up trash. At which point they told me, hey, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be speaking to local bars, like bar associations.
Right, yeah.
So I said, well, and they said, well, we can't find anybody who wants you to speak there. I'm like, okay. And they said, no, well, don't worry about it then.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, throw me in that briar patch. And then it was like, are you going to the rehab? I'm like, no, I'm not. Okay. Well, just don't report anymore. Okay. So that was fine, which then led to the Cobb County, which gave me 6 years of 3+3 consecutive. And they wanted random drug tests 3 times a week for 6 years. And $45 a pop, that gets a little rich. So they didn't do that either because they sent it down to Fulton. And Fulton said, well, you're fine. You know, and all the AAs and the counselings, at some point it becomes a gimmick. And like I told the judge in Cobb County, just let me do it my way. Let me just show you, and I'll be clean. And it worked out. After I lost my license, after the Cobb County arrest, I decided, hey, you know what? I need a change in my life, so I'm going to go live with a woman who sells drugs in Forsyth County for a while. Because that's the kind of change I needed.
One good decision after another.
It was. I'm gonna write a self-help book too. Yeah. And then in March of 2015, I just had enough, and folks offered me a job in construction, and something about being 86 feet in the air. You can't really do drugs and be walking that at the same time. And I've been doing construction and carpentry ever since.
You've never, or are you able, if you wanted to go back to the law, would you be able to, you think, get your license back?
There's an avenue there, but I don't want
Not even interested.
I'm really not interested. It's not sour grapes. I look at the state of the way it is today anyway, and I just don't want to put up with that bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of people think, law and order is, being a lawyer is like being, like Law and Order, or like it's it's exciting, and
right.
It's a lot of filling out paperwork and.
Well, I was a real trial lawyer. I tried cases to
you still have
juries.
to fill out some paperwork.
Sure, absolutely.
It's still a lot of stress. What I'm saying is,
that's what also got me in trouble. I didn't fill out enough paperwork. But you're right, though. It is, and you're taking, and it's that like we're held to a higher standard. Well, maybe not. But we're taking out the criminal lawyers, and I was unable at some point to compartmentalize all the bullshit through all the years. Mm-hmm. I'm not making an excuse for it, but obviously I couldn't handle it. Something snapped in my head. But we're taking on, everybody's problems. Everybody, and it's like you couldn't go anywhere. Everybody's like, "Oh, you're a lawyer. Let me ask you this," and that's all you ever talk about. It's all you ever hear about. It's like, "Oh, my lawyer," and then people want to argue with you. It's like, well, then don't ask me questions. Mm-hmm. Then it's just the shittiest fucking set of facts you can. Nobody ever says, oh, hey, let me tell you, I need, will you come be at the baptism of my granddaughter? And I thought I had cancer, but I'm cured. No, it's like, oh, my granddaughter was by my son. It's always some bullshit, mm-hmm. And it's a lot of people, obviously millions of lawyers can do it every day. I just don't want to do it. I don't. It's nice. I don't want to hear about other people's problems anymore.
I was going to say there's something satisfying about, I don't know if you get this in the law. I can't imagine that you necessarily do. Well, maybe if you build a case and see the case through, like I think from a prosecutor's perspective, it might be different. But I was going to say, it makes me think of like when you mow a yard mm-hmm. and you get to step back for that moment and go, wow, that feeling of accomplishment. You probably get that in construction more than you maybe do in the law. I could be wrong. But.
It's funny you say that because yesterday I'm putting up these large format tiles on the wall and step back and looking at it. And then it became a metaphor for my life as one after the other fell off the wall. No. And I was like, oh, that is a metaphor for my life. But you're right. You step back and you look at it like the freshly cut grass. And when I prosecuted, even I think a little more so when I defended and won a jury trial, that was a little more satisfying. Especially,
of course, it could go the other way though.
Well,
then it wouldn't be satisfying. Right.
And there was a couple I lost that I should not have lost. The irony is the last case I tried up in Hall County, a couple days before I was all taken down in Cobb. Well, but I was, arguably, I was under the influence in Hall County as well. And it was a 13 ounce. So my client was charged with trying to purchase 13 ounces of methamphetamine from an informant who was audioed and videotaped in the vehicle.
That seems tough. That seems like a tough case to win.
Yeah, it was tough for the prosecutors because the jury came back in 13 minutes and acquitted.
Huh.
Right. So, it was,
That's a nice case. Yeah.
it was a fun case. Yeah. It was, the informant had himself. They still had all the audio, video, the officer. And I just, you hear my client at one point saying, yeah, I'll take one. And, so we just argued that they were trying to push 13 ounces on him. And Hall County jury, But again, it was a case I shouldn't have won. So I ended that on a good note, I guess. Or a good note before all the bad notes.
All right.
But it is what it is. I when I was in law school, I was going to quit after the third day, and I got to meet Chief Justice Robert Benham. And he took, I didn't know who he was at the time, but this little old man was encouraging me to stick with it and to leave the law, in better shape than I found it, and do right by it. And then attorney, he goes, go sit in the auditorium and listen to the next speaker. And it was the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. And I did not, all kidding aside, I did not leave the law in better shape than I found it. I disgraced it. I get that. There's nothing I wouldn't do to go back and undo it, but I can't, it's enough. I think I've beaten myself up enough about this over the years. And I'm still a better lawyer than most people will ever meet.
Hey, you guys, I appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this. Also, please consider joining our Patreon. It's $10 a month. Really does help Colby and I make these videos. Thank you very much. Please share this. See ya.